The bond arrived before Nora was ready for it, and she had been waiting for it for 6 years. She stood in the center of the ceremony field with her bare feet pressing into the cold grass, her silver-white hair loose around her shoulders, in the way the blood moon ceremony required all unmarked wolves to wear it. The drums beat in their slow, ancient rhythm, deep enough that she felt each pulse in her chest as much as heard it with her ears. Torches burned at the 4 compass points of the inner circle, and she knew exactly where each one was, by the radiant warmth on her skin and the smell of burning pitch. She had memorized every inch of this field over 6 ceremonies. She knew where Elder Bram stood by the particular weight of his breathing. She knew approximately where Callum Drake stood, because she had always known, without consciously trying, the location of the person with the most gravitational pull in any space, and Callum Drake had the greatest gravitational pull of anyone she had ever been near. She had never let herself examine that knowledge too carefully. When the warmth hit her behind the ribs, she thought for one confused second that she had stepped too close to one of the torches. Then it spread outward from the center of her chest in every direction at once, and she understood. The bond. It was nothing like what the old songs described. The songs called it a flood, lightning, the moment when a door you had been pushing against all your life finally swings open. What Nora felt was simpler, and in some ways more overwhelming than any of those images. It felt like recognition, like something inside her had always known this was coming, and had been quietly, patiently holding the space for it. She turned her face slightly to the left, drawn toward the source of it the way all living things are drawn toward warmth, and she knew, before her mind had finished forming the thought, exactly who stood 23 paces away on the far side of the inner circle. She had known Callum Drake's location in rooms for years without ever letting herself understand why. She had known the specific weight of his footstep in the hallways of the Pack Lodge. She had known the difference between his voice in an ordinary conversation and his voice when he was making a decision that would affect people's lives. She had known the particular way the air in a room shifted when he entered it. She had filed all of this away in a part of herself she kept firmly closed, the way you close a room that holds something you are not ready to face. Tonight the door to that room had come open on its own. For exactly 4 seconds, she let herself breathe. Then she heard Callum's footsteps slow. They stopped completely. The drums kept their rhythm. The torches kept burning. But the bond in her chest had stilled in a way that felt less like peace, and more like the stillness before something falls. She felt the change move through the crowd too, felt it in their breathing, and the small unconscious shifts of hundreds of bodies. The field's collective attention had tilted from ceremonial patience into something sharper and more anxious, a room full of people, collectively holding the same thought without saying it. Callum Drake was not moving forward. Every wolf in every pack knew the convention. When the bond revealed itself, the 2 revealed souls closed the distance between them. That was the whole of the physical ceremony, 2 people walking toward each other across a field. Convention, tradition, the moon goddess, and 300 years of Silvercrest history all required exactly one thing in this moment. You walked forward. Callum Drake was standing still. Felix Marsh, his beta, said something low and urgent close to Callum. She caught the shape of the consonants but not the meaning. A pause followed in which she tracked the quality of Callum's stillness, and found in it something she did not want to find: deliberation. He was deciding something. Decisions made in moments like this one were almost never small. Then his footsteps began again, and they moved not toward her but toward the center of the field, the speaking place. Nora found a fixed point in the cold air ahead of her and held it with her face and her attention. She pressed her hands flat against her sides. She breathed with careful, deliberate control. Callum's voice, when it came, was clear and carried across every corner of the field without strain. "I see who the bond has chosen," he said. "I see her." The field waited. "And I refuse it." The silence that followed was the loudest silence Nora had ever experienced. It pressed against her from all sides simultaneously, heavy with other people's shock, and with the particular devastation of a person hearing said aloud, in front of witnesses, the thing they had always been most afraid was true. She had always been afraid she was not enough. She had hidden the fear very carefully, and had lived her life as fully as the pack allowed, and she had told herself most mornings that the fear was only fear, and not prediction. She had done a reasonably good job of believing it. The silence told her the fear had known something she had refused to let herself know. Callum kept speaking, His voice was controlled, almost reasonable. The moon goddess has her purposes, and I respect them. I respect the ceremony, and what the bond represents. But what has been chosen tonight is a mistake I am not willing to accept, because accepting it would mean accepting a partner who cannot serve the functions that an alpha's mate must serve. An alpha's mate must run the perimeter. She must be present at negotiations, at assessments, at the kind of moments when a second pair of clear eyes is what keeps a pack alive. She must be capable of protecting herself when circumstances require it. What has been offered to me tonight is a woman who has been blind since birth, and who has never, in 22 years, demonstrated any function within this pack that justifies the resources she has required. This is not cruelty. I want the pack to understand that clearly. This is the survival of the Silver Crest pack, which is my first and only obligation. I will not compromise that obligation for a bond I did not choose. He paused, and in the pause, she heard him calibrate the room the way a skilled speaker does, adjusting for silence and space. I reject this bond. Formally, completely, and finally. Nora stood very still. The bond was tearing. That was the only word for what was happening inside her chest. The warmth that had arrived so suddenly was being unmade in sections, each one unwinding from around her ribcage like a thread being pulled backward through cloth, and each section that came loose left behind a cold space that her body did not know how to fill. She had never had this happen before. Nobody had adequately described what a rejection felt like from the receiving end. The songs did not cover this part. The elders did not discuss it. She had not prepared for it, because preparing would have required expecting it, and she had worked too hard to let herself expect it. Her knees bent slightly. She straightened them immediately. She did not fall. Elder Bram's rough old voice broke through the silence. Alpha, the rejection must be formally witnessed and recorded. Fine, Callum said. Let it be recorded. His footsteps crossed the field toward her. She heard the distance closing in measured, unhurried steps, and she did not move back and she did not lower her chin, and she held her position in the center of the inner circle and waited for whatever was coming. He stopped directly in front of her. She could feel the heat of him even through the cold night air, could smell the cedar oil in his jacket and the cold pine scent of the territory that clung to everything here. She was aware of him with the precise and painful clarity of someone who has spent years carefully not being aware of something and is now, all at once, unable to continue that practice. He said, very quietly, for her ears alone, I am sorry, but you always knew this was not possible. She did not answer him. She had no answer that would have been worth giving. He raised his voice for the pack. I, Callum Drake, Alpha of the Silver Crest Pack, formally reject Nora Voss as my fated mate. This declaration is made before every witness present, before the elders of this pack, before the moon goddess and whatever else may be listening. This rejection is final. It cannot be rescinded. The bond finished tearing. The cold that replaced it was not the cold of winter, which has texture and movement and the smell of coming change. This cold was the cold of an absence, the cold of standing in a space where something living used to be and is now simply not. It sat in her chest, like a stone placed in a cavity that had never been designed to hold one. Her hands shook. She pressed them flat against her thighs. Furthermore, Callum said, with the smooth efficiency of a man who had finished the difficult part and was now moving through the administrative remainder, I hereby declare the exile of Nora Voss from the Silver Crest Pack, effective at first light tomorrow morning. No pack member is to provide her shelter, food, or assistance of any kind after the exile takes effect. Any pack member found in violation of this decree will answer to me directly. A sound moved through the crowd, not words. Breath. Dozens of people exhaling at the same moment, the sound of people registering something beyond what they had been prepared for. Elder Bram said carefully, Alpha, the grounds for an exile declaration must meet. I am the Alpha, Callum said. The grounds are what I say they are. She holds no rank, serves no function, and carries no value to this pack's strength or continuity. The exile stands. He walked away. His footsteps were steady and entirely unhurried. The ceremony dissolved around Nora. People moved, their steps scattering in every direction, some hurried and some slow, some pausing near her for a moment before continuing without speaking. She could feel the ones who paused, felt them hovering in the space near her, with something trapped behind their lips that they could not afford to release, and she understood them. She did not blame them. Speaking against Callum Drake had costs that ordinary people with families and lives could not easily absorb. She was not angry at them for their silence. She was something else, something she had not yet named, something that was growing very quietly in the cold space where the bond had been. Elder Bram came to stand beside her. His breathing was slow and slightly labored, old lungs in cold air, and beneath it, she heard the specific quality of silence that belongs to a person who is carrying sorrow they do not know how to put down. He did not speak for a long time. "Child," he said finally. "I am fine," she said. Her voice was steady. She was extremely proud of that. "Nora, you do not have to." "I would like to go to my room," she said. "I would like a few hours before morning." She heard him make the decision she knew he would make, the decision not to push further, not because he did not care, but because he understood that what she was giving him was a gift, the gift of not asking him to carry anything else tonight. "I am sorry," he said. "I want you to know that." "Good night, Elder Bram," she said. She walked back to the Pack lodging house without assistance. The path was one her feet knew completely, worn into her memory by 10,000 repetitions. Every rise and dip in the ground, every change in the gravel underfoot, every post and gate and doorframe, exactly where it had always been. She went to her room at the far end of the East Hall, and she closed the door behind her, and she sat on the edge of her bed, in the darkness that was always her darkness, and she put both hands flat on her knees. The stone in her chest pulsed once, then settled. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about her options the way she had always thought through difficult things, methodically, without letting the feeling of the situation make the thinking smaller than it needed to be. There were 3 options. None of them were good, and only one of them was real. She could try to appeal to Elder Bram or another elder in the morning, and ask for a formal review of the exile grounds. But Callum had already made his authority on the matter clear, and Bram had not challenged him publicly, and the remaining elders would follow Bram's lead. That option would not produce a different outcome. It would only prolong the process of arriving at the same ending. She could try to reach someone in the pack before dawn and ask for help, but the decree had been specific and public, and the people who might have wanted to help her were the same people who would pay the price for doing so. She would not ask that of them. The third option was the only honest one. She would wait for morning. She would be walked to the border by whoever Callum assigned to the task. She would cross the boundary stones, and she would walk forward into whatever came next, because walking forward was the only direction that had ever led anywhere. She sat in the quiet, and she waited, and the thing she found in the waiting was not the grief she had expected. It was anger. Not the hot, sputtering kind that burns bright and goes out fast. The other kind. The settled, deep-rooted kind that does not need fuel because it generates its own heat from the inside. The kind that waits without noise and does not announce itself and does not particularly care whether anyone else can see it. She held on to it the way you hold something in moving water, firmly, without drama, letting it anchor her. The night passed slowly. She did not sleep until very late, and when she did, it was not deeply. She lay on top of the blanket, and she listened to the lodging house go quiet room by room, voice by voice, footstep by footstep, until there was nothing left but the wind in the trees beyond her window, and the small sounds of an old building settling into the cold. The first birds began in the gray before dawn. Then, in the hall outside her door, the footsteps started. She was already sitting up when they arrived. Felix Marsh knocked twice before he opened the door, which was more courtesy than Nora had expected. She was already sitting up when he entered. She had not slept beyond the first hour after lying down, and she had spent the remaining dark hours folding her few possessions and arranging everything she intended to take into a small canvas bag she had found under the bed months ago and never used, because she had never been anywhere but here and had never needed a bag for traveling. She packed by touch, which she had done her entire life. She was finished long before the first bird called outside her window. Felix stopped just inside the doorway. She heard 2 other wolves in the hall behind him, both young, their breathing carrying the particular tension of people who have been given an assignment they did not want and are doing their best to carry it out, with as little emotional presence as possible. She heard it in Felix's voice too, that slight roughness before her name. Felix Marsh was not a cruel man. This was something she had always quietly known about him. He was a loyal man, which in a pack led by Callum Drake meant he had spent 4 years doing things he did not entirely agree with, and the residue of that was present in his voice whenever he was asked to do something that sat wrongly in him. Today sat very wrongly. "Nora," he said. "I am ready," she said. A pause. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "You have until the sun clears the tree line," he said. "I only need 5 minutes," she said. She stood, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. He stepped aside before she reached him, which meant he had been watching her movement and had adjusted without being asked. She noted this without comment. The 2 younger wolves in the corridor moved back as well. One of them, a boy whose voice she recognized as Petter, who was barely 19 and had always spoken to her directly when many others did not, said nothing but exhaled in a long, sharp breath through his nose that contained more feeling than most people's words. She walked. The morning air outside the lodging house hit her like cold water, sharp and full of information. Frost on the grass, the particular mineral smell that meant the temperature had dropped past freezing and come back up overnight. Somewhere in the direction of the western tree line, a crow called once and then went quiet. People were watching. She had been certain they would be. The watching was not loud. It was in the stillness near doorways and windows, in the quality of breathing that did not move, in the way that silence gathered when many people were all holding it at once. She had read this particular quality of silence many times in her life, in rooms where she walked in and conversations paused, in gatherings where her presence shifted the energy without anyone acknowledging it. She knew what it meant. It meant she was being watched by people who were not certain what to feel and were defaulting to stillness while they decided. She walked steadily. Her back did not bow. Her pace did not falter. Whatever anyone was deciding while they watched her from their doorways, they would find nothing in her movement that made the deciding easier. The path from the lodging house to the border stones was one she had walked hundreds of times, always in the other direction, always arriving home. She knew every section of it. The packed dirt path past the common house, the slight upward slope near the elders' building, where the ground rose 6 inches over about 20 feet, and then leveled out, the gravel section near the storage barns, that sounded different underfoot than the surrounding dirt, the long flat grass of the eastern meadow that led to the tree line. She listened as she walked, not for any specific thing, for all of it, the particular combination of sounds and smells that made this territory, that made it distinct and individual, and the only home she had ever known. She was cataloging it. She understood this even as she was doing it. She was recording the sensory memory of this place as completely as she could, because after this morning these paths would not be accessible to her, and she wanted to carry the memory of them the same way she carried everything that mattered, precisely and without sentimentality, because precision was how things lasted. A woman's voice said, low and quick from somewhere near the barn, "Nora." She recognized it. Petra, the baker's wife, who had sometimes set aside bread for her at the morning distribution, and who had never made any show of the kindness. Nora kept walking, not because she was angry at Petra, and not because she did not feel what was in the sound of her name in that voice, but because if she received kindness right now, she would not be able to keep her pace steady, and she needed her pace to be steady, more than she needed anything else in this particular moment. The border stones were at the far edge of the eastern tree line, 4 large flat rocks in a row, old enough that their edges had softened with weather, their carved founding symbols worn nearly smooth. She had pressed her palm to them as a child many times, had felt the faint hum of the ward stones, and understood it instinctively, as the feeling of a boundary, of the edge of the safe place. She stopped 3 feet short of them. Felix and the 2 young wolves had followed the entire way in silence. They stopped behind her. "This is as far as we go," Felix said. "I know," she said. A pause. She heard him draw a breath and hold it, and she waited to see if he would say anything more. He did not. She understood why. The decree existed, and he was bound by it, and Felix Marsh was a man who honored his obligations, which was ultimately both his best quality and the quality that would be his burden to carry for a long time after this morning. She took 3 steps and crossed the line of stones. The pack bond severed. It was nothing like the tearing of the mate bond the previous night. It was quieter and more total. A clean separation, like a cord cut rather than frayed. The pack bond had been in her since she was a puppy, a low, persistent frequency at the edge of her awareness, the background hum of belonging to something larger than herself. She had not understood until this moment how much of her sense of orientation, not just emotionally but practically, had depended on it. It had been her North Star. It had been the thing that told her she was located, that she existed within a framework that extended beyond her own body. Now it was gone, and the world was quieter than it had ever been. She kept walking. Felix said something behind her. One of the young wolves said, "Should we?" And Felix said, "No." And after that there was only the wind in the pines and the stiff frost grass under her feet, and the tree line opening up ahead of her. She walked until she was through the first section of trees, and certain she was out of their sight. Then she stopped. She stood in the middle of the forest and she breathed. The forest was different from the pack territory. It was older and wilder, and had not been shaped by anyone's intentions. The trees here were bigger, and grew at the angles they had chosen for themselves. The undergrowth was thick and damp. The sounds were completely different from anything she had grown up in. No human voices, no domestic animals, no pack movement in the distance. Just the wind in the branches above her, a jay somewhere to the northeast, and the slow, measured drip of overnight frost melting from the lower leaves. She took stock. She had 3 changes of clothing, a small knife, a flint and striker, 2 pieces of dried bread from her room, a wooden cup, a blanket rolled tight and strapped to the outside of the bag, the coat she was wearing, her warmest one, her 2 feet and her 2 ears, and a sense of smell that had been her primary navigation tool since the day she first understood what navigation meant. She was not helpless. She had been telling herself this for 22 years, and every time the world had tested the claim she had found it to be true. This was simply the largest test so far. She turned east, because the faint warmth beginning on the right side of her face told her that was where the sun was starting to climb, and she walked. The first day in the forest taught her quickly and without any ceremony. She learned where the roots were by catching them. The first time hard enough to scrape her knee, the second time less. She learned that this forest smelled differently in different directions, and that the differences carried meaning. Pine resin meant higher ground. Damp earth meant low ground. The cold mineral smell meant running water was near. She learned that the birds in this section of forest were not habituated to human presence, and went quiet when she passed, and resumed when she was a safe distance away, which meant their resuming was information about what was behind her. By midday she had found the stream. She had heard it before she smelled it, that low rush of water moving over stones, and she followed the sound until it was directly beneath her, and she crouched and drank from her cupped hands. Cold and clean, she filled the wooden cup and drank again. By late afternoon she had found the ruins. 3 walls of an old stone building standing to about shoulder height, the roof long since collapsed. She cleared the interior with her foot, and tested the ground for moisture, and found the corner, where the 2 remaining walls met the most protected section of floor. She laid out the blanket. She ate half a piece of dried bread slowly. She drank the remainder of the water she had collected. Then she sat with her back against cold stone, and she let herself feel, for the first time since the ceremony, what she had been holding carefully at a distance all day. It was not grief. She examined it closely and confirmed, not grief. What she felt was more like the sensation of a noise you have heard for so long you forgot it was a noise, suddenly going silent. There was an emptiness, and the emptiness was also a kind of silence, and in the silence there was something she had not been able to hear before. Something small and clear and entirely her own. The anger was still there too. If anything, it had become more settled, more structural, less like a reaction to something and more like a quality that simply belonged to her. She would survive this. She did not doubt it, not because she was extraordinary, but because she had been training for exactly this kind of solitude her entire life, without knowing that was what she was doing. Every time the pack had excluded her from something, every time she had been left to navigate a situation alone, because no one had thought to help her, or because helping her would have cost them something, she had developed a specific kind of capability that lived in the space where other people kept their dependence on others. That capability was going to matter now. A wolf howled somewhere to the north, sharp and solitary, with the slightly frantic quality of a rogue wolf whose anchor had long since been lost. She sat with her back against the stone, and she listened until it faded. Then she closed her eyes, and let the dark that was always her dark wrap around her. And she held the anger, and the quiet, and the beginning of something she could not yet name, and she waited for the morning. On the second morning she found berries along the northern bank of the stream. She located them by smell first, a sweet tart note carried on the early air, and then by the brush of leaf against her hand as she moved along the bank. She tested one against her lower lip, the way her mother had taught her when she was 4. A bad berry numbed the lip within seconds. A safe one gave a clean, sharp tartness. This one was safe. She ate slowly, and left enough on the branch for the birds who depended on them. The injuries from the first day were healing. Her feet were toughening, and something else was happening that she noticed with careful, curious attention on the morning of the second day. Her senses were sharpening in a way she had not expected and could not entirely explain. Not dramatically, not all at once, but the range of what she could distinguish with her hearing was expanding. The subtlety of what she could read from a smell had increased, and the other sense, the one she had never had a name for, the ability to feel the emotional weight of a presence, to read the current underneath what people showed on the surface, was growing with a clarity that had not been there before. She considered this as she followed the stream north on the second morning. She thought about the pack bond that had been severed. She thought about the mate bond that had been torn away. She thought about every external connection that had been removed from her in the past 36 hours, and she thought about what happened to water when a channel is blocked. It finds another way. Whatever had always been at the center of her, the gift she had carried without knowing its name, was finding another way. She was still thinking about this on the third morning when she smelled them. The wind shifted twice in the early afternoon, and on the second shift brought something from the west that she recognized before she had consciously processed it. The raw, unmanaged quality of wolves belonging to no pack. Wolves who had been surviving on instinct alone, long enough for the rougher parts of that instinct to come to the surface. Rogue wolves. She stopped moving immediately, stood completely still in the undergrowth, and let her awareness expand in every direction, gathering information the way a net gathers water. 4 of them, possibly a 5th whose scent was older, and might mean someone who had passed through earlier, rather than someone currently present. They were upwind of her, and moving with a slow, deliberate patience that did not belong to wolves that were wandering. They were tracking something. That something, she understood with absolute certainty, was her. She did not run. She moved instead, steadily and quietly, toward the water sound she had been aware of for the past hour. She found the stream where it narrowed over a rocky bed. She stepped into the shallows and positioned herself against the bank, with water behind her and the forest in front. She could hear them clearly now, 4 of them, spreading outward as they moved, closing in from multiple angles. She tracked each one individually, noting pace and position, calculating the gaps. 40 yards. 25. The silence of predators making a final assessment. She waited. Then, from the north, a horn sounded. A single long blast that traveled across the forest with the particular authority of a sound that has been designed to carry meaning at distance. Everything went still. The rogues held for 3 seconds. Then all 4 broke simultaneously, crashing west through the undergrowth, in a disorganized retreat that said everything about the reputation of whoever had blown that horn. Within 20 seconds, they were gone. The horn sounded again, closer. Then boots, heavy, disciplined, 5 or 6 pairs keeping perfect formation, moving through the trees from the north, with the measured confidence of trained wolves who knew how to read terrain. They came through the tree line to her right, and stopped at the bank. A man said, "This is Iron Crown territory." She turned toward him. "I know," she said. She felt him take in the full picture of what he was looking at. A young woman, alone, standing in a stream, barefoot, with a small bag, 3 days of the outdoors on her skin, and eyes that did not track his face. "You are in Iron Crown territory, without authorization," he said, differently the second time. "I was exiled from Silver Crest Pack 3 nights ago," she said. "I had limited choices about direction." A short pause. A decision. "Owen Ward," he said, "head of the Iron Crown Patrol." "Nora Voss," she said. "Can you walk to the Iron Crown Fortress?" She considered the question, and what it meant, and what it did not mean, and whether she had any real alternative. She stepped out of the stream. Her feet hit dry ground, and 3 days of held together, caught up with her all at once, the way exhaustion always waits for a moment of safety before announcing itself. Her legs folded. Owen Ward caught her. It was fast and matter-of-fact, no drama, no exclamation, just a pair of steady hands that were already in the right place. "I have you," he said. She got her feet back under her, and straightened, and stood, until the world stopped tilting. "I am fine," she said. "You have been fine for 3 days," Owen said, and there was a dry, not unkind note in his voice that she found, despite everything, very slightly funny. "You are permitted to not be fine for 1 hour." She was quiet for a moment. "All right," she said. 1 hour. She walked to the Iron Crown Fortress with her hand on Owen Ward's arm, her bag over her shoulder, and her chin level. She did not ask how far it was. She listened as the forest gave way to a maintained road. The road gave way to stone, and the particular echoes of a large building with high outer walls surrounded her on 3 sides. She did not fall again. Zane Cole was not a man who went to look at things he did not need to look at. He had learned this discipline early, and had refined it over 8 years, as Alpha King. Every room he entered, every situation he gave his attention to, cost something, and the cost was always paid in focus that could not be applied elsewhere. He did not attend to things out of curiosity. He attended to things that required decisions, and he made the decisions with the least possible emotional noise, and he moved on. He told himself this when Owen Ward came through the war room door and delivered his report. He told himself this when he folded the map he had been studying and walked through the corridor and down the stairs to the medical wing. He told himself this right up until the moment he walked into the treatment room and stopped and stood still and looked at what was lying on the bed. She was younger than Owen's report had suggested, or perhaps it was only that she looked younger in stillness. Early 20s, with silver-white hair spread loose across the pillow, which was not a common color on anyone under 60. Her face in sleep held no expression at all, the complete blankness that belongs only to deep exhaustion. Her hands lay on top of the blanket, palms up, and it was the hands that stopped him. The inner surfaces of her wrists were marked. He came closer, moving quietly without being entirely conscious that he was doing it. He looked at the marks. They were not injuries. They were not the kind of marks left by ropes or trauma. They were part of her skin itself, silver white and faint, in a pattern that seemed to have been growing there for some time. He had seen pack marks before, the identifying marks some wolves were born with that indicated lineage or blood connection to something older. These were nothing like pack marks. These were different in a way he could feel as clearly as he could see. Older, denser with meaning, the kind of marks that appear in old texts, alongside language that the modern world had largely forgotten. He had read those texts. He stood by the bed for a long time. Mia Grant, the head healer, came to the doorway once and looked at him and said nothing. Mia had worked in the Iron Crown medical wing for 11 years and had developed, over that time, the ability to read exactly when the Alpha King was standing in a room for professional reasons and when he was standing in a room for other reasons. She was professional enough not to mention this distinction aloud. "Send for Elder Lena," Zane said, without turning from the wrists. Mia said, "Yes," and went. He was alone in the room. He stood back from the bed and put his hands at his sides, and he looked at the woman who was sleeping the deep, pulled-under sleep of someone whose body had decided enough time had been lost to wakefulness. 3 days in the borderlands alone, 4 rogue wolves. She had been standing in a stream, according to Owen, when the patrol found her. Standing, not crouching, not hiding. Standing in the water, with her bag over her shoulder, waiting for what came next. He found that he had a specific response to this fact that he did not immediately know how to classify. He stayed in the room for 11 minutes before he heard Lena Hart's footsteps in the corridor, quick and light the way they always were. An old woman who had been moving fast for 63 years and had not seen any reason to slow down. Lena was the royal seer of the Iron Crown. The title sounded more decorative than it was. Her actual function was to know things that other people did not know, and to tell Zane about them without padding. She had served in this capacity for 22 years, first under his father and then under him, and she was the sharpest mind in the fortress, with the possible exception of Zane himself, which he acknowledged without difficulty, because his father had taught him early that surrounding yourself with people less capable than you was the fastest way to make poor decisions. Lena stopped at the foot of the bed. She looked at the woman sleeping. Then she looked at the wrists. Then she looked at Zane, with an expression that contained several things her mouth did not say. "Where did you find her?" she said. "Northern Stream Sector. Exiled from Silvercrest Pack. 3 days in the borderlands alone." He paused. 4 rogues were tracking her when the patrol arrived. "Exiled," Lena said. The word came out flat in a way that was not neutral. "Yes." Lena moved to the side of the bed. She reached out and touched the marks on the woman's wrists very lightly, with 2 fingers, the way you test ice to see whether it is solid. Then she said, quietly and with complete certainty, "Moonblind." The word fell in the room, like a stone, placed very carefully on a surface that has been waiting for exactly that weight. Zane said nothing. "The last confirmed case was 312 years ago," Lena said. "A woman named Bess, from the Eastern Pack territories, who lived in a fortified holding for 40 years, and served as truth reader for the Alpha line of that era. She died at the age of 77, and when she died, the gift went with her. There have been unconfirmed reports since then, scattered across 3 centuries, but nothing that could be verified against the marks. I have only ever seen them in drawings in the oldest section of the library archives, but I am looking at them now, and they are exactly as the drawings described." "What does she do?" Zane said. "A moonblind cannot see the physical world," Lena said, "but she sees everything beneath it. True intentions beneath stated ones. Real feelings beneath performed ones. The actual content of a person's character beneath the version they present to the world. Every deception is visible to her. Every hidden motive. Every suppressed emotion. She cannot be lied to in any meaningful sense, because she reads not the words but the person speaking them." Lena paused. "She is the most accurate reader of the human soul that the moon goddess ever created, and someone exiled her into the borderlands 3 days ago, and sent 4 rogue wolves after her." The last sentence was not a question. It was Lena making a specific observation, and delivering it to Zane in the manner that meant she expected him to have a response. "She stays," Zane said. "I assumed," Lena said. "Full care. No restrictions on her movement once she is recovered. No one questions her or presses her for information before she chooses to speak. She is a guest of the Iron Crown, not a subject of it." "Understood," Lena said. He went back to the war room. Owen was at the far end of the table with a supply ledger, marking numbers with the careful attention of a man who found precision in figures genuinely satisfying. He looked up when Zane entered, and then looked back down at the ledger, which was exactly the right response to the particular quality of Zane's expression. Zane sat at the head of the table. He put his hands on the map. He looked at the markers indicating patrol zones and border positions, and the 3 ongoing territorial negotiations that required attention this week. He moved one marker 2 inches to the left. Then he moved it back. Owen, who had been Zane's head of patrol for 6 years, and had in that time developed a very thorough understanding of when not to speak, continued with his figures. The afternoon passed. The council convened for its regular session, and Zane attended, and said what needed to be said, and made the decisions that needed making. He reviewed the border report from the south, and sent a response. He met with the head of the fortress provisions staff, and approved a storage plan for the winter. He did all of these things with the precision and completeness that he always brought to them. At some point in the mid-afternoon, he realized he was listening for a particular sound from somewhere in the direction of the east wing. He noticed that he was listening for it. He did not examine this closely. He redirected his attention to the provisions plan and finished it. That evening after the evening meal, Mia Grant came to the war room and reported that the woman in the first treatment room had eaten some broth and was sleeping again, and that her injuries were healing well, and that she had not spoken except to say that she felt better, which Mia delivered with the slight smile of a woman who found the word better somewhat understated given the circumstances. "Good," Zane said. "Thank you, Mia." Mia left. He worked until midnight. The fortress went quiet around him, the way large fortresses go quiet, gradually, and from the outer rooms inward, until the only sounds were the guards on the outer walls and the low wind from the north that had been building since sundown. At some point near midnight he got up from his chair and walked from the war room to the east corridor. He walked the length of it, which was not a short walk in a fortress this size. He stopped outside the door of the first treatment room. He stood there for approximately 30 seconds. He heard her breathing through the door, even and slow and deeply asleep, the breathing of someone whose body had decided it was finally safe enough to truly rest. He stood outside the door for 30 seconds, and then he walked back down the east corridor to his own chambers, and he went to bed, and he lay in the dark for a long time before he slept. He told himself it was the border negotiations, and the winter provisions, and the 3 territorial disputes currently in various stages of resolution that were keeping him awake. He was not, in general, a person who lied to himself, and he did not manage it well now either. In the morning he got up before the sun and went to the war room, and by the time Owen arrived with the morning patrol report, everything on his face was exactly as it always was. Owen accepted the morning's briefing, collected the patrol instructions Zane had already prepared, and left. Gareth, the most senior member of the Iron Crown Council, arrived shortly after to discuss the southern border meeting, and Zane gave the discussion his full attention, which was the only kind of attention he gave to anything. And underneath all of it, steady and specific and impossible to reason away, the sound of even breathing through a closed door. By the time the morning was half over, the woman in the East Wing had woken up. Mia came to tell him at the war room door, saying simply that their guest was awake and asking no questions, and appearing, in Mia's professional estimation, to be both completely oriented and somewhat more composed than the situation strictly required. Zane set down his pen. "Tell her she is a guest of the Iron Crown," he said. "Tell her she is not required to speak to anyone until she is ready." "Yes," Mia said. And then, with the particular restraint of a woman who had something else to say and was choosing not to say it, she asked where she was. "Tell her," Zane said. "I told her," Mia said. She nodded and said, "I thought so." And then she sat up. Mia left. Zane looked at the war room for a moment, at the maps and the markers and the pending correspondence arranged in 3 ordered stacks on the right side of the table. Then he got up and walked to the East Wing. He had no particular reason. He simply walked there. He had not done a great many things without particular reasons in the 8 years since his father had died and the title had come to him. He had found that reasons were the most efficient way to organize a life that was required to contain an extraordinary volume of decisions and consequences. But he walked to the East Wing without a reason that he could have stated clearly, and he walked into the treatment room without announcing himself, and he sat in the chair by the window. The woman on the bed was asleep. He sat. He did not examine, while he sat there, exactly what he was doing or why. He simply sat in the chair by the window while the morning moved across the high stone wall outside, and the light shifted from gray to pale gold, and the fortress went about its morning business around the quiet of this one room, and he was present in a way he was very rarely present, without agenda and without calculation, in a space that was asking nothing of him. When she woke, he was still in the chair, and the first words she spoke were not what he had expected. Nora woke to the sound of rain against stone, somewhere above her and to the right. She lay still for a full minute before she moved, which was her habit in any unfamiliar space. Wait, listen, build the picture. The surface beneath her was soft and warm. The air smelled of dried herbs, clean fabric, and the faint mineral quality of stone that had been stone for a very long time. A fire, somewhere to her left, low and settled, not recently fed. A door directly ahead, closed. A high ceiling, from the way the sounds moved. And a chair to the right, near what was probably a window, 12 feet from the bed. Someone was sitting in the chair. She felt this before she heard it clearly. The particular weight a person gives to a space. The small and constant adjustments of breath and posture that a body makes, even when it is trying to be completely still. Whoever was in the chair had been there long enough to have settled into the very specific stillness of someone who was comfortable waiting, not waiting with impatience, which had its own sound and its own particular quality of restlessness, waiting with patience, which was entirely different and considerably rarer. She sat up. The movement shifted the blanket, and the person in the chair made a very small adjustment, the adjustment of a watcher whose subject has moved. "You are awake," a man said. His voice was deep and even, and had the quality of a voice that was accustomed to being heard by rooms full of people without being raised. It was the voice of a man who had never needed to raise it. She turned her face toward him. "You have been sitting there for some time," she said. A pause. Not the pause of someone caught off guard, the pause of someone who was making a genuine and careful assessment. "You are observant," he said. "I heard you settle into the chair," she said. The way a person settles when they are comfortable waiting is different from the way a person sits when they are only passing time. People who are comfortable waiting distribute their weight fully into a chair rather than perching forward on it. You have been there at least an hour, possibly longer. The pause that followed this was slightly longer than the first one. "That is accurate," he said. She adjusted her angle slightly to get the clearest possible read. It was not his voice she was tracking primarily, though his voice told her things. It was what people carried without knowing they were carrying it, the emotional weight that surrounded a person the way heat surrounds a fire, the interior landscape visible beneath the surface of any human being if you knew how to look. She had always been able to do this, in limited ways, since childhood. But the 3 days in the borderlands had changed something. The range of what she could sense had deepened and widened, and the layers she could distinguish had multiplied. What she read from him was complex, and layered in ways she had not encountered before in a single person. Control, at the surface. Tight and disciplined, the kind of control that is maintained constantly, and has been for years. The way a well-built dam is maintained, not naturally, but deliberately, with ongoing effort. Beneath the control was something harder and older, not cruelty, but a hardness that had come from loss, that had been processed so thoroughly, and for so long, that it had changed form entirely. Grief transformed into structure, into function, into the very bones of how a person held themselves in the world. And beneath that, so faint it was almost undetectable through everything that layered above it, uncertainty. Not the uncertainty of someone who does not know what to do. The specific uncertainty of a person who knows exactly what to do in every situation he encounters except this particular one. "You are carrying something very old," she said, "a loss. You turned it into something functional, which is the intelligent response to grief, but it is still there. It is part of how you are built now." The room went very quiet. "You are also," she said, "not entirely certain why you are sitting in this chair." A pause, longer than the previous ones. Then, "How are you doing that?" "I do not entirely know," she said honestly. "I have always been able to sense what people carry beneath the surface, their real feelings underneath what they show, their actual intentions underneath what they say. It has been there since I was small, but it is stronger than it was 3 days ago." "You cannot see me," he said. "No. But you are describing things about me that most people in this building do not know." "Yes," she said simply. A measured silence. "Zane Cole," he said. She had already begun to form the conclusion. People who held the kind of authority she was reading from him, the kind that had been built over years and that carried the particular weight of someone who was ultimately responsible for everything in their environment, tended to occupy spaces differently from anyone else. He did not just sit in the room. He was the room's center of gravity. "The Alpha King," she said. "Yes," he said. The door opened. Mia Grant came in with a tray, warm and efficiently cheerful in the way of someone who found satisfaction in practical care. Behind Mia came an older woman, whose footsteps were quick, and whose presence carried a focused sharpness of attention that Nora felt immediately. "You are awake," Mia said, with genuine pleasure in her voice. "How do you feel?" The older woman came to stand near the foot of the bed. "I am Lena Hart," she said, "Royal Seer of the Iron Crown. I would like to ask you some questions, if you are willing. Not today necessarily, but soon." "You can ask them now," Nora said. Zane did not move from the chair. Lena sat on the edge of the bed and began her questions. They were careful and precisely sequenced, each one building on the answer to the previous one, and Nora answered them honestly, because dishonesty with someone this precisely intelligent would have been a waste of both their time. She described what she could sense from people, what it felt like, what the layers were, how long she had been able to do it, how it had changed during the 3 days in the borderlands. When she finished, Lena was quiet for a moment. "What you carry is called moonblind sight," Lena said. "It is one of the oldest recorded gifts of the moon goddess, and it has not appeared in any confirmed form for over 300 years. A moonblind sees what ordinary sight cannot access, not faces, not the physical world, but the interior of a person, their genuine emotions beneath the performed ones. Their real intentions beneath the stated ones. Every deception is visible to them. Every truth, however deeply suppressed. She paused. The marks on your wrists are the moon goddess's identification of a moonblind. They will continue to grow as your gift grows. Nora sat with this. Why did it grow stronger when I was exiled? She said. Because the gift feeds on the self, Lena said. When you are embedded in a pack, your energy flows outward, toward your bonds, your obligations, your place in the collective. When all of that is removed at once, the energy turns inward instead, and whatever is at the center of a person expands into the space that the bonds used to occupy. 3 days alone in the borderlands, stripped of pack bond and mate bond, and every structure that had previously organized your interior life, was the ideal condition for your moonblind sight to mature. That is a generous interpretation of 3 very unpleasant days, Nora said. I did not say it was pleasant, Lena said. I said it was ideal. The two are rarely the same. She rose, said she would return in the morning, and left. The room settled into quiet. Mia set the tray on the small table beside the bed, showed Nora where everything was, and left as well. Zane had not spoken since Lena arrived. You are a guest here, he said, not a prisoner. You will not be confined or restricted. Once you have fully recovered, you are free to move through the fortress as you choose. A proper room will be arranged for you. She absorbed this. Why? She said. A pause. She read it, a person considering which true answer to give. You are on Iron Crown territory, he said. What happens to people on my territory is my responsibility. She let the answer sit for a moment, and she read what was underneath it. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. There was more there, something more specific and less administrative. She did not push it. All right, she said quietly. He stood. She tracked the sound of him rising, the measured footsteps crossing the room to the door opening and then closing behind him. She lay back on the warm bed and pressed one hand flat against her chest, over the center of the cold space the broken bond had left, and she found, carefully, that the cold there was slightly less total than it had been the morning before. She noted this without naming it. It was too early to name things. The rain went on outside the window, even and patient, and she closed her eyes and let it cover everything, and she slept. The days that followed built a life around her, in the way that lives build themselves, when the person inhabiting them is not actively resisting. Gradually, incrementally, each day adding something small to what the day before had established. Mia was direct and practical. She said where things were, and she asked what Nora needed, and she did not speak about Nora to others in the room, in that particular lowered voice that Nora had spent her entire life hearing. The voice that was used for children, and the unwell, and people being discussed rather than addressed. Mia addressed her. It was a simple thing, and it made an unusually large difference. A room was arranged for her on the 2nd floor of the East Wing, and she spent 2 days learning it completely. Distance from the bed to the door, distance from the door to the window, location of every piece of furniture, the sound the floorboards made at different points, and what those points meant for navigation. The fortress itself she learned more gradually, adding a new section every day or two, building a complete interior map from sound and texture and air pressure, and the particular way the fortress spoke to itself through its own stone, differently in the morning than in the evening, differently when it was cold outside than when it was mild. On the 5th day, Lena Hart came to the library and began the training. Nora had not known what to expect from formal training in something she had been doing instinctively since childhood. What she found was that instinct and skill were related, but not the same, and that the gap between them was exactly where Lena lived. Lena taught her to distinguish between surface emotion and structural emotion, the feeling a person had in the moment versus the feeling they had been carrying for years. She taught her to identify the difference between a lie of omission and a lie of commission, and a lie that the person telling it had told themselves so many times they had stopped recognizing it as a lie. She taught her to read a room as a complete system, rather than as a collection of individuals, to sense the emotional current, the way a navigator senses the current of a river. It was the most demanding work Nora had ever done. She was very good at it, which surprised her, not in the fact but in the degree. She had expected to be adequate. She discovered she was better than adequate. The gift that had been growing in her for 22 years, constrained and unsupported and never named, had been waiting for exactly this, a skilled teacher, and a name, and permission to expand fully into what it had always been trying to become. 3 weeks after she arrived at the Iron Crown Fortress, she was sitting in the library doing her evening reading practice with Lena when Zane came through the door. He had stopped by the library several times in those 3 weeks, for various stated reasons, to check on the training progress, to speak with Lena about other council matters, to retrieve a specific text from the shelves. Each time, he stayed longer than the stated reason required. Nora had noted this without mentioning it. This evening he had no stated reason at all. He sat in the chair across from her, and Lena excused herself with the smooth social precision of someone who had spent 63 years knowing exactly when to be elsewhere. "How is the training?" he said. "Progressing," she said. "Lena says I am advancing faster than the historical records suggested was typical, but she also acknowledges that the historical records are limited." "And outside the training?" he said. She considered. "The fortress is the first place I have lived in my adult life, where I am not managing the question of whether I should be here," she said. "That is a significant difference from what I was accustomed to." He was quiet for a moment. "You were managing that question in the Silver Crest Pack?" "Every day," she said, "in varying degrees, some days more than others. It is very tiring, managing a question that has no good answer. It takes energy that could be used for other things." A long quiet. "What do you read in me tonight?" he said. "The same things I read every evening when you come to this room," she said. "The control, the old grief, the specific kind of loneliness that belongs to a person who is surrounded by people but cannot be one of them." She paused. "And tonight, something slightly different. You are carrying a specific thought that you have not yet decided whether to share." Silence. Then, "My father built this fortress," he said. "Not literally. His grandfather built it, but my father shaped it into what it is, the way a person shapes an institution over time through the decisions they make inside it. He died when I was 22, and I have been inside his decisions ever since, trying to understand which ones I would have made differently and which ones I would not." A pause. "I have never said that to anyone in this building." "I know," she said. "How?" "Because it is the kind of thing a person thinks for years without saying," she said. "The kind of thought that gets heavier the longer it is not spoken, not lighter. You have been carrying that particular weight for 8 years. He looked at her across the table. She could not see his face, but she could read his presence, and what she read in the long silence that followed was something shifting, something that had been held very tightly, for a very long time, carefully, quietly beginning to release. "Some things are not meant to be fixed," she said. "They are meant to be carried differently, with less isolation." He stayed in the library until the fire in the grate had burned to embers, and when he left, he said good night, in a voice that was slightly different from his usual voice, with something in it that had not been there when he arrived. She sat with the cooling room after he was gone, and she held what had just happened carefully, examining it from every angle, because it was something she had not been prepared for, and she wanted to understand it clearly before she let herself have any response to it at all. She was not entirely certain she succeeded in that. 3 weeks became 4, and then 5, and somewhere in the 5th week Nora stopped counting. She had counted at first because counting had felt like a form of honesty, a way of keeping a clear record of how long she had been in a place that was not, technically, hers. But the counting had become less meaningful as the fortress became more known to her, as the library's specific quiet became familiar, and the second-floor east corridor became her corridor, and Mia's particular way of setting a tray down became a sound she associated with the kind of routine that anchors a person's day. She was not counting when Zane asked her to come to the council chamber. It was a Tuesday morning in early winter. Lena had just finished a training session that had focused on reading groups rather than individuals, on distinguishing the emotional current of a collective from the individual voices within it, and Nora had been sitting in the library with the residual concentration of a person who had been working very hard in a very specific direction when Zane knocked and entered. "The council meets in an hour," he said. "I would like you to be present." She turned toward him. "As what?" "As an observer," he said. "You are not required to speak. You are not required to do anything except be in the room. She understood what he was not saying. He wanted her in the room, the way a person wants a particular tool within reach, not because they are certain they will need it, but because they want it available if they do. "All right," she said. The council chamber was a long stone room, with a high ceiling, and a table that seated 16. She took a chair near the door, which was her preference in any unfamiliar formal setting, and she settled in and let her awareness expand slowly over the room, the way Lena had taught her to do, taking the current of the whole space before moving to the individuals within it. 14 men and 2 women. Most of them were exactly what they appeared to be, experienced wolves with genuine concerns, and a direct investment in the issues being discussed. The council session covered border patrol adjustments, winter supply provisions, and a water rights dispute between 2 smaller pact territories to the south that had been ongoing for 3 months without resolution. Zane led the discussion with the particular precision she had come to associate with him. He asked the right questions, he listened to the full answer before responding, and he never used 2 words where one would do. She read the room in layers. At the surface, the usual mix of genuine engagement and polite performance that characterized any large professional gathering. Underneath that, the specific concerns and personal stakes of each individual, the ways in which the official topic intersected with their private interests and worries. And in one case, something that was neither of those things. A man near the middle of the table on the left side, she had to work to find his name. Doran Cross. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his contributions were measured and forgettable. The perfect pitch of someone who wanted to be present in the room, without drawing direct attention to themselves. He had the careful quality of a person performing ordinariness, and it was exactly that careful quality that made him visible to her. What she sensed from him was not ambition, or the particular hunger of someone who wanted more than they currently had. It was not hostility toward anyone in the room. It was fear. Old, specific, compressed. The fear of someone who had done something they could not undo, and had been carrying the knowledge of it for long enough that the fear had become structural. The way a scar becomes structural. The way an old injury changes how a person holds their body. He had been afraid of this specific thing for months, possibly longer, and the management of that fear had become so habitual that he had probably stopped distinguishing it from his ordinary state of being. He was afraid of being found out. After the council session, when the last footstep had faded from the corridor, and she heard Zane cross the room to where she was sitting, she waited. "Well," he said. "Most of them are what they appear," she said. "There are personal concerns beneath the professional ones for several of them, but nothing that would concern you specifically. 2 of them are worried about the same thing, for different reasons, but neither will say so directly, which is a communication problem rather than anything larger." She paused. "One of them is afraid of something being discovered, something he has already done." Zane was very still. "Doran Cross," she said. A long silence. "How certain?" he said. "About the fear." "Entirely certain," she said. "About the specific thing he has done, that is beyond what I can tell you. I can read the emotional state. The factual content of the underlying cause is something an ordinary investigation would need to find." "That is enough," Zane said. He left. The investigation took 4 days. Owen Ward ran it discreetly through 3 sources, and produced, on the 5th morning, documentation showing that Doran Cross had been providing specific information about Iron Crown patrol schedules and border movement patterns to a rival pact territory to the west. He had been doing so for approximately 7 months. The rival territory had been using this information to apply coordinated pressure to 3 of the Iron Crown's southwestern affiliates, pressure that had been attributed to coincidence and strategic intelligence rather than a specific internal source. Doran Cross was confronted privately. He confessed within the first hour. He was removed from the council and placed in the holding chambers pending a formal hearing. The rival territory to the west was formally notified that their source had been identified, which ended the pressure campaign more cleanly than any military response could have managed. That evening, Zane came to the library. Lena was already gone. The fire was low. Nora was sitting with her hands in her lap, and a text she had been listening to Lena read still on the table in front of her. Zane sat across from her. "You were right," he said. "He was afraid," she said. That is always the clearest signal. People who have done something wrong spend so much energy managing the fear of discovery that the fear becomes the loudest thing about them, louder than anything they say with their words, louder than their behavior, louder than everything they are trying to project. 6 years of running this council, Zane said, and I did not see it. You were looking at what people say and do, she said. Those things are easy to control. A skilled person can say and do the right things indefinitely. What they cannot control is what they carry inside them, because that does not obey the same rules that behavior does. He was quiet for a moment, and she read something in the quality of that quiet, a person processing a shift in how they understood something they had believed they understood well. What does it feel like, he said, reading people? She thought about how to answer this. Like light through water, she said. The surface shows you one thing, and the depth shows you something different, and both things are true simultaneously. Most people only read the surface. I read both. It is not better exactly. It is just different information. Do you read me that way? He said. Every time you are in the room, she said. And what do you find? She had been sitting with the answer to this question for several weeks, adding to it and refining it each time she was in his presence, and she had a very clear picture by now. Someone who is doing the job he was given, with more discipline than most people in your position would manage, she said. Someone who has never, since the age of 22, allowed himself to be anything other than exactly what the position requires. Someone who is so good at being what the position requires that he has almost forgotten what the position is costing him. Silence. Almost, he said. Almost, she agreed. Another silence. Longer. My father used to sit in this library on Sunday evenings, Zane said. He said it was the only room in the fortress where the stones were arranged, in a way that let him think without the thinking, becoming immediately about something he needed to decide. He paused. I have sat in this room on Sunday evenings for 8 years, without understanding, until now, why I kept doing it. She sat with this. He sounds like someone worth missing, she said. He was, Zane said. He was also very difficult and very demanding, and he expected from me things that I was not always certain I could provide. But he was fair, and he was honest. And in my experience, those two things together are considerably rarer than they should be.
Yes,
She said. They are. Outside the library window, the winter wind had picked up and was moving through the trees at the northern edge of the fortress grounds, with a sound like water over stones. The fire in the grate had burned low, but was still giving warmth, and the room was the kind of quiet that comes when two people have said something real, and neither of them is in a hurry to cover it with something smaller. Zane did not leave. She did not say anything to encourage him to stay. He sat in the chair across the table from her, and the evening passed around them in its own way, and sometime in the late hours he said good night, and she said good night, and he left, and she sat alone for a while after that, hands in her lap, listening to the fire. She knew what was happening between them. She had known for some time. The moonblind sight made certain kinds of knowing unavoidable, and what she could read from Zane Cole in his unguarded moments, in the pauses between his carefully chosen words, and in the specific quality of his attention when it was directed at her, was as clear as anything she had ever read in anyone. The question was not what it was. The question was what she was going to do with knowing it. She was, she realized, slightly afraid of the answer, not in the way she had been afraid of things before, the defensive fear of someone bracing for harm. This was a different kind of fear, the kind that lives in proximity to something you want very much and are not yet certain you are allowed to reach for. She sat with it in the quiet library long after the fire had gone to coals. She was still sitting there when Mia came to find her and suggested, with her characteristic practical kindness, that beds were generally more comfortable than library chairs, and that it was well past midnight. Nora agreed. She went to her room on the second-floor east corridor, and she lay down in her bed, and she stared at the ceiling she could not see, and she thought, very carefully, about the things she was afraid of, and she decided, with the same methodical practicality she brought to everything, she was going to let it be there. Whatever it was, she was going to let it be there. She slept well. On the Tuesday of the following week, a courier arrived at the Iron Crown Gate, carrying a letter with a sealed crest that Zane recognized before he had even fully read the name on the outside. He came to the library to tell Nora. She was in the middle of an exercise. She finished it before she responded to anything he said. Then she turned toward him. "Callum Drake," she said, before he spoke. He was quiet for a moment. How did you know? Something changed in you when you walked through the door, she said. You carry news of him differently from other news. It has a specific quality. He told her about the letter, the diplomatic request, the formal meeting at the Iron Crown. She was still for a moment. He is coming here, she said. In 2 days, he said. You do not have to be present. I want you to understand that. I would like to be present, she said. Nora. I would like to be present, she said again, with exactly the same weight on the second saying as on the first. He looked at her across the room. All right, he said. Callum Drake arrived at the Iron Crown Fortress on a Thursday morning, with 4 men, and an air of deliberate composure. Nora heard his party arrive from the upper corridor she had chosen specifically for the purpose of listening. She heard the hoofbeats enter the courtyard, the exchange with the gate guards that was professional and slightly too smooth, the way footsteps sounded on the bridge stones when a person was paying attention to how they sounded. She went down to the receiving hall. The room was large and cold and formal, arranged with the specific intention of establishing the Alpha King's authority over any diplomatic meeting held inside it. Zane sat at the head of the table. Owen stood behind and to the right of Zane's chair. Elder Gareth, the most senior member of the Iron Crown Council, sat to Zane's left. 4 additional council members occupied chairs along the table. Nora took the seat Zane had indicated, near the wall to his right, which put her in the room without positioning her directly across from Callum. She heard the door at the far end of the hall open. She felt Callum Drake's presence before his footsteps reached the middle of the room, and the feeling was as familiar and as unwelcome as a particular kind of weather returning after she had believed it had finally passed. She knew the weight of him. She had known it for years, though the knowledge had a different texture now than it used to. Before, she had known him at a distance, filtered through the pack bond and her own careful management of what she was and was not allowed to feel. Now she knew him directly, and what she read was clear, and not complicated, and not kind. Cold ambition was the loudest thing about him, had probably always been the loudest thing about him, though she had not been able to hear it clearly before. Underneath the ambition was shame, compressed tight, processed downward into the deepest possible layer of his interior, because shame was not something a person like Callum Drake had any use for, and he had no tolerance for carrying things that served no function. Beneath the shame, pressed even further down, something that was not love, something that was the opposite of love, which was not hatred, but a specific kind of hunger that had no genuine object. He wanted what she represented. He wanted to correct a calculation that had gone wrong. He had not come here for her. He had come here for what losing her had cost him, and for what having her back might recover. She heard him enter the room, heard him cross to the table, with the deliberate, controlled pace of a man who was very conscious of every footstep he was taking. Heard him exchange greetings with Zane, in the particular tone of one powerful man addressing another powerful man across a formal table, each of them aware that the other was measuring them. He did not see her immediately. She was near the wall to Zane's right, and not the obvious focal point of the room, and his attention had been, initially and naturally, on Zane. Then it moved. She felt the shift in him when his gaze landed on her, a fractional hesitation in his breathing, a microsecond of stillness, before his social management reasserted itself, and his posture returned to its calculated ease. He had not expected her to be here. His preparation for this meeting had not included the specific complication of her being present in the room. She sat very still with her hands in her lap and her face slightly toward him, and she said nothing. Callum made his formal introductions. He spoke of inter-pack relations, the value of clear and direct diplomatic communication, the mutual benefits of cooperative management of the territories between Silvercrest Pack and the Iron Crown. He was smooth and organized, and, if you did not have the ability to read the current underneath the performance, genuinely persuasive. Then he pivoted. There is also a more specific matter I would like to address, he said. I understand that a woman was found on Iron Crown territory some weeks ago, a woman who was exiled from the Silvercrest Pack under the standard protocols of pack law. She was found on my territory, Zane confirmed. Yes. The law of exile, Callum said, requires that an exiled member remain outside all pack territory for a standard period before petitioning for reinstatement or seeking new pack affiliation. She appears to be residing inside the Iron Crown Fortress, which could be construed as She was found on my territory, Zane said again, with precisely the same words but a slightly different weight in them, the weight of a person who is saying a thing for the second time, specifically because they want the meaning to be very clear. Injured and requiring care. My territorial law supersedes exile law in matters of welfare for any person found within my borders. She is here as a guest of the Iron Crown. A pause. She was exiled from my pack, Callum said. The circumstances under which that exile was declared were— She does not belong to anyone, Nora said. The room went still. She had spoken from her seat near the wall without raising her voice, and the quality of the stillness that followed was the specific stillness of a room that had not expected a particular voice and did not know what to do with it for a moment. An exile decree removes all pack obligations, she said, into the stillness, all bonds, all membership, all claims. If I were still a member of the Silver Crest Pack, I would still be a member of it. The exile was declared publicly, before every witness in the pack, before the elders, before the moon goddess. You cannot exile a person and then claim authority over her in the same conversation. The two positions cannot simultaneously exist. Callum's 4 men shifted in their chairs. She felt it as a physical thing, the collective physical discomfort of people who had come into a room prepared for one kind of meeting and were finding that the meeting was a different kind. Callum's tone, when he responded, was managed very carefully, but she read the layer underneath the management. Something had tightened. This is not the appropriate context for— I will determine what is an appropriate context on my territory and in my house, Zane said, without particular heat, simply as a statement of fact. Callum went quiet. Zane stood. The shift of his standing in the room had its own specific quality, the way a change in atmospheric pressure has a quality, and she read in it the full weight of the authority he carried, which was considerable. You and your men are guests of the Iron Crown for this evening, he said. You will be housed and fed. Tomorrow morning I will call a formal hearing in this chamber, which is within my right as Alpha King, to convene in any dispute involving a wolf found on my territory. All relevant matters will be addressed then. She felt him assess, felt him calculate, felt him arrive at the conclusion that he had no current leverage to push further. As you say, he said. They filed out. She tracked Callum's footsteps through the room. Near the door, they paused. She felt his attention turn toward her, brief and specific, heavy with the particular quality of a man looking at something he has miscalculated. Then he was gone. She stayed in the receiving hall until the sound of his party had faded completely from the corridor, and the adjacent hallway and the stairwell beyond. Then she let out a slow breath through her nose and sat with her hands flat on her knees. She heard Zane cross the room to her. Tell me what you read, he said. He did not come here for me, she said. He came because losing me has cost him something he did not anticipate. I am not certain what, precisely, whether it is political standing or some other form of loss, but the calculation that led to the rejection and the exile did not account for this outcome, and he is here to correct a mistake he made because he was not in possession of full information. Zane was quiet. He does not know what I can do, she said. He knows what I am, in some sense. He knows the marks mean something, but he does not understand the moonblind sight, what it means to be in a room with me. He came here believing that whatever advantage I might represent to whoever holds me, the advantage is equivalent to the advantage of any strategically valuable person. He does not understand that what I can do is categorically different from that. And now that he has been in the room with you, Zane said. She considered. He is uncertain, she said. For the first time since he made the decision to reject the bond, he is genuinely uncertain. And that uncertainty is going to make him unpredictable tomorrow. Unpredictable how? Zane said. He will either manage it and present his case carefully, or he will not manage it and do something that removes the need for a formal process. She paused. I do not know which it will be. I can only read what is present, not what a person will decide to do with what is present. Zane was quiet for a long moment. Will you be all right tonight? He said. The question was simple and specific and carried nothing extra. No performance of concern, no overlay of anything he was not genuinely feeling. She turned toward him slightly. Yes, she said. I will be all right. A pause. Good, he said. He did not leave immediately. She was aware of him standing near her in the receiving hall, In the specific way she had become very aware of his presence over the past weeks, not through sound or smell alone, but through whatever it was the moonblind sight used to locate a person it had catalogued as significant. When he did leave, she stayed in the room for a few more minutes after he was gone, sitting in the formal hall with the cold pressing in from the stone walls and the torches burning low in their brackets, and she thought about tomorrow, and she thought about what she was going to say, and she thought about how long she had carried the weight of what had happened on the night of the ceremony, without anywhere to put it down. Tomorrow she was going to put it down. She was not afraid. She found this interesting. She had been afraid of many things in her life, most of them reasonable things to be afraid of, and she had thought, on the night of the exile, that she would be afraid of this moment when it came, the moment of standing in front of the full weight of what had been done to her, and speaking it out loud, in a room full of people who had the authority to do something about it, or not. What she felt instead was ready. She had been carrying this for 6 weeks. She was going to set it down tomorrow morning, and let the record hold it. She went to her room on the second-floor east corridor, and she lay down in the dark, and she slept immediately and deeply, and without dreams. The sleep of someone whose body understands that tomorrow will require everything they have, and has decided to prepare accordingly. In the morning she woke before the first bell, and she lay still for a moment listening to the fortress wake around her, and she thought, today the record gets made correctly. Then she got up. The council chamber in the morning held everyone. Every senior council member was present, which Nora knew from the particular density of the room's sound, the specific way 14 or 15 people occupied a large stone chamber and made it feel smaller without filling it. Elder Gareth sat at the head of the long table beside Zane, who had positioned himself to the right in the specific arrangement that made clear this was a council, proceeding with institutional authority behind it, not a personal meeting between two alpha leaders. Lena Hart sat to Zane's left with the texts. Owen Ward stood at the door. Callum Drake and his 4 men occupied chairs along the right wall. Nora sat near the center of the room, at the table, which was not where she had sat the day before. This had been her choice, and Zane had not questioned it. The chamber smelled of cold stone, and the particular wax of candles that had been burning for a while, and the faint trace of the morning's wood smoke from the hearth in the corner, that had been lit before anyone arrived. She read the room as a whole first, letting the emotional current of the space tell her the dominant weather before she moved to the individuals within it. The dominant note was tension, not hostile tension, but the tension of a room that contained something unresolved and that was aware of its own significance. Beneath the tension, genuine concern from most of the council members, a focused professional attention from Elder Gareth, from Lena, a quality of anticipation that she had only observed in the older woman when something historically significant was about to be documented. From Callum's side of the room, the 4 men in various states of controlled discomfort, and Callum himself running the same calculation she had read from him since his arrival, compressed tighter now, the edges of his composure under a pressure that had not been there the previous morning. Elder Gareth opened the proceedings with formal precision, moving through the opening structure that Nora had learned enough about council procedure to follow. He stated the purpose of the meeting, its authority under Interpack law as exercised by the Alpha King, and the legal framework within which the morning's discussion would be conducted. Then he read the records. He read the formal record of the Blood Moon ceremony, including the declared bond, the witnesses present, the conditions under which it had been revealed. He read the formal record of the rejection, which had been witnessed by Elder Bram of the Silver Crest Pack, and recorded in the pack registry the following morning. He read the formal record of the exile decree, its stated grounds, its terms, and the manner of its execution. Each document was precise and complete, and each one dropped into the room with the particular weight that official records carry, the weight of something that has been written down, and therefore cannot be argued with, only addressed. Then Lena read from the Iron Crown's own archives. Her voice was clear and unhurried, and what she read was the section of the Royal Seer's archive dealing with the moon-blind sight, its origin, its characteristics, its place within the gift tradition of the Moon Goddess, its legal status under the ancient compact between the Moon Goddess and the founding packs. She read the historical accounts of the last confirmed moonblind, the accounts of the marks and their significance, and the specific passage from the ancient compact that addressed the treatment of moon-gifted wolves within the pack system. She read this passage twice. Its meaning was clear both times. Callum's advocate, a sharp-faced man who had said nothing until now, and who had been sitting very still with his hands on the table and his attention carefully distributed, began to make a note. When Lena finished, Gareth said, "Alpha Drake, you are invited to address the council." Callum spoke well. She had known he would. She had never thought he was unintelligent. Callum Drake was many things that were not good, but he was not stupid, and he did not waste what he had. He laid out his position clearly, and with reference to specific pack law, the right of an alpha to decline a bond on stated grounds, the historical precedent for this right, the distinction between legal process and ethical judgment, the way the pack law had been written to allow exactly what he had done. He was technically accurate. The law did say what he said it said. What the law did not contain, and what he did not address, was the specific section Lena had just read, the ancient compact's provisions for moon-gifted wolves, which predated the modern pack law structure by several centuries and, in cases of conflict, took precedence over it. When Callum finished, Gareth said, "Nora Voss, you are invited to address the council." She stood. She was aware of the room's attention moving to her, the specific quality of a large group of people, all deciding simultaneously to listen to one voice, and she let it settle around her before she spoke. She had thought about how to begin, and had decided to begin at the beginning. She described the blood moon ceremony from the moment the bond arrived, not from the beginning of the evening, but from that exact moment, the warmth behind her ribs, the direction it came from, the 4 seconds she had breathed before Callum's footsteps slowed. She described what she had heard and felt in the following minutes. She described the words Callum had spoken publicly, each one, in the order they had come. She described what he had said privately, the words that had been intended for her ears only. You always knew this was not possible. She described the Exiled decree and its terms. She described the walk to the border stones the following morning, and the severing of the pack bond, and the 3 days in the borderlands, and what those 3 days had contained. She spoke for approximately 12 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform distress. She simply reported events in the order they had occurred, in the language of someone who understood that the clearest possible testimony was also the most devastating possible testimony, because the clearest possible testimony was the one that required no embellishment and left no room for reasonable alternative interpretation. Then she said, "I would like to say one more thing, if the council permits." Gareth said, "Go ahead." "On the night of the ceremony," she said, "when Alpha Drake stood before me and delivered his rejection, I used the gift I carry to read what was present in him. I was not trained at that point. I did not yet know the name for what I could do, but I have always been able to sense what is genuinely true in a person, beneath what they say and beneath what they choose to show. And on that night, the thing that was most genuinely true in Callum Drake was not concern for the Silvercrest Pack's future." She paused. The room was very quiet. "It was pride," she said. "The fear that standing before his pack, with a blind Omega as his fated mate, would make him appear weak. Not weak in the practical ways he described publicly, not because of any genuine assessment of my capabilities or my limitations. Because of how it would look, because he believed the pack would think less of him for it. He was afraid that the story they would tell about him would be a story about weakness, and he could not tolerate that story." Another pause. "He did not reject me because I was incapable. He rejected me because he was afraid of what other people would see when they looked at him standing next to me. And he is here now, in this room, for the same reason he rejected me then, because the story has gone wrong, and he wants to correct it, and I am the correction." She sat down. The silence in the chamber was the kind that follows a true statement in a room full of people who recognize truth when they hear it. Not comfortable, but complete. Callum's advocate shifted his papers. Then a voice Nora had not heard in the formal portion of the proceedings spoke up. Felix Marsh stood from his seat at the table. He had come with Callum as part of the diplomatic party, which she had known from his scent and the specific quality of his footstep when they entered the building. He had been silent through everything until this moment. "I would like to speak," he said. Gareth looked at Callum. Callum's face, she imagined from the quality of his silence, did not change, but she felt what was underneath it change considerably. "Go ahead," Gareth said. Felix Marsh did not speak with oratory, or with any apparent concern for how what he was saying would be received. He spoke the way a man speaks when he has decided he is done managing his own silence on a subject. He confirmed the specifics of the exile morning, the timing, the supplies provided, the manner in which the decree had been executed. He said that several members of the Silver Crest Pack had been disturbed by the events of the Blood Moon night and the following morning, and had not spoken, because Callum Drake's authority made speaking costly. He said that he had been carrying his own silence on the subject for 6 weeks, and had come to this meeting not entirely in a diplomatic capacity. He said, "I should have spoken that night. I did not. I am speaking now." He sat down. The chamber was very quiet. Lena then spoke. She returned to the specific passage from the ancient compact and read it again, more slowly this time, and then she provided the legal interpretation. The exile of a moon-blind wolf, declared without legitimate grounds, and in a manner inconsistent with the ancient compact's protections, did not simply constitute a violation of those protections. It voided the authority of the declaring alpha over the exiled wolf in all prior contractual forms, including the mate bond, retroactively. The bond, she said, had been voided not by the rejection, but by the unlawful exile. The moon goddess's own law had unmade it. Nora felt the marks on her wrists grow warm. She could not see it, but she felt it clearly. Warmth spreading up her forearms, the same warmth she had felt when Lena first identified the marks, but more complete now, moving with a sense of direction. Several people in the room made sounds, small and involuntary. Callum stood. She heard his chair and his footsteps crossing the floor, and she tracked him, and she did not move. And then everything in the room shifted, because Zane Cole had risen from his chair and was between her and Callum, before Callum's second step had landed. She had not heard him move. He had simply arrived, the way a wall arrives when you were not looking at it. No words. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds, and contained within it the entire weight of the situation, made manifest in the physical space of 2 men, and the gap between them and the decision being made in that gap by one of them. Callum stepped back. Elder Gareth said, with the calm precision of a man who had been in rooms like this before, and who understood that the calm voice was the important voice. "Alpha Drake, you are directed to vacate Iron Crown territory by the end of this day. A formal council hearing regarding the circumstances of this case will be scheduled within 30 days, at which time all pack members and relevant witnesses will be given the opportunity to present testimony." Callum said, "This is not finished." Zane said, "It is finished for today." Simple words. Entirely level. The words of a man with no need to make them anything other than what they were. Callum and his men filed out. She tracked them through the room and into the corridor, and down the stairs and across the courtyard, following the sound until it became too faint to track, and then faded completely. The council chamber emptied slowly. Council members spoke to each other in low voices as they left. Lena gathered her texts carefully. Owen spoke with Gareth near the door. Nora remained in her chair. She sat in the gradually emptying room, and she waited until she was certain that Callum Drake was out of the building, and then she sat a little longer, until she was certain he was out of the courtyard, and then a little longer still. Then she let out a breath so long, and so fully released, that she was briefly amazed by how much she had been holding. The marks on her wrists were still warm. She pressed one finger lightly to the mark on her left wrist. Then she folded her hands in her lap and sat in the quiet room and simply breathed. She had done what she came to do. The record was correct. She stayed in the room alone for a few more minutes, not because she needed to, but because the quiet of an important room after important things have been said in it was its own particular kind of peace, and she had not had very much peace recently, and she intended to take a small amount of it now while it was available. Then she got up, straightened the chair, and walked out of the council chamber, and into the corridor, and toward the east wing and her room. She was not the same person who had walked into that room this morning. She was not entirely certain yet who she was instead. She found that she was not particularly worried about figuring it out. The fortress was quiet by the time evening settled fully over it. Callum and his men had ridden out in the mid-afternoon, the sound of their departure crossing the courtyard and moving down the road and dissolving into the distance. And then there was nothing but the ordinary sounds of the Iron Crown going about its evening, meals prepared in the kitchen, guards rotating at the outer wall, the low and gradually relaxing voices of people who had been tense since the previous morning, and were carefully, slowly letting the tension go. Nora waited until she was certain the common areas would be quiet. Then she went to the courtyard. The courtyard was at the center of the fortress, open to the sky on all sides, surrounded on 3 sides by the main building and on the 4th by the outer wall. She had been there dozens of times since arriving, at different times of day and in different weather, and she knew it completely. The exact count of steps from the main door to the central bench, the slight rise in the stone pavers, 6 steps from the eastern entrance, where the ground had settled unevenly over the years, the way the wind moved through the open square differently from how it moved anywhere else in the fortress, because there was nothing to obstruct it. It was raining when she stepped outside. Not hard, a soft, even rain, the kind that came straight down, without any wind to angle it, the kind that soaked into cloth and hair and skin, gradually and thoroughly without drama. She stood just inside the door for a moment, and felt it against her upturned face, and then she walked forward into it. She had been in the courtyard in rain before, but always briefly, moving through it on the way to somewhere else. Tonight she had nowhere to be. She walked to approximately the center of the courtyard, and she stood there, and she let the rain fall. She was not thinking about Callum Drake. This was significant, and she was aware of its significance. She had spent 6 weeks with some portion of her mental space occupied by him, the anticipation of his return, the preparation for the hearing, the management of what she was going to say and how she was going to say it. All of that was done now. The hearing was complete. The record had been made. He was someone else's problem from here, and she had no intention of giving him any more of her interior life than she absolutely had to. She was thinking about other things. She was thinking about who she had been when she walked across the border stones 6 weeks ago. The person who had stood in that ceremony field with her hands flat at her sides and refused to fall, and who had walked back to her room alone, and who had lain on top of her blanket in the dark and found, in the cold space where the bond used to be, a small and unexpected piece of anger, and held onto it like a handhold. She was thinking about what 3 days in the borderlands had done, not just to her sight but to her understanding of what she was. Every time she had been in trouble out there, she had found that she had what she needed. Not because she was extraordinary, because she had spent 22 years developing exactly the capabilities that the world had told her were not enough, and those capabilities had turned out to be more than enough when nothing else was available. She was thinking about what the fortress had done, the way it had, almost without intending to, given her a context in which what she was became useful rather than inconvenient. She was thinking about Zane. She lifted her face to the rain. It fell on her forehead and cheeks, and the bridge of her nose, and the curve of her jaw, cold and even, and entirely without judgment, and she stood in it, and she let herself think about Zane in the specific and honest way she had been somewhat avoiding, not because she was afraid of the subject, but because the subject deserved more space and attention than the last 6 weeks had left room for. She thought about the first morning, when she had woken in the treatment room and sensed him in the chair before he spoke, and what she had read from him in that first careful reading, the control, the grief turned to structure, the specific loneliness of someone who has been in charge of everything for so long, they have lost the sense of what it feels like to be in charge of nothing. She thought about the library evenings, and what they had built between them, without either of them naming it, and what it had felt like to hear him talk about his father in a voice that was slightly different from every other voice he used. She thought about all of it, and she thought about what she sensed from him every time he was in the same room, the thing that had been building for weeks, and that she had been reading, grow steadier and more settled with each passing day, the thing that was clear and specific and unmistakable to anyone who could read it. She thought about what it meant to her, and she was honest with herself about what it meant, which took a little longer, because honesty about this particular subject was the kind that required sitting with the discomfort of wanting something, rather than managing it from a safe distance. She wanted it. She stood in the rain, and she let that be true. The footsteps behind her came perhaps 10 minutes after she had arrived in the courtyard. She recognized them before they had crossed half the distance from the main door. She had recognized them for weeks, in any space, in any condition, because she had catalogued them with the unconscious thoroughness that her sense applied to things it had decided were significant. The pace, the weight, the specific sound of someone who moved through the world with the full awareness of exactly how much space they occupied and what responsibilities that space implied. She did not turn around. Zane stopped about 6 feet behind her. The rain fell between them. She heard it on the courtyard stones around them, and on the walls, and on the bench, and on whatever he was wearing. And underneath the rain, she heard his breathing, which was slightly different from its usual quality, slightly quicker, as if he had been walking fast before he entered the courtyard, and had only recently brought the pace down. He had been looking for her. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The rain continued. "You should have a coat," he said. "You should be inside," she said. A pause. Not long. The pause of someone who has decided something and is completing the decision. "I was concerned," he said, and then, a moment later, more quietly, "about you." "I know," she said. A pause. "How do you—" he started. "Because you have been concerned every time I have gone anywhere alone since the morning I arrived here," she said. "I do not need the moonblind sight to know that. It is in the pattern. Your footsteps find me within 20 minutes of my going anywhere quiet and alone. You have been doing it since the first week." Silence. "I did not realize you had noticed," he said. "I notice everything," she said. The rain. She heard him shift slightly, not moving closer. Just adjusting his weight in the specific way that a person adjusts when they have decided to say something and are completing the last small internal step before saying it. "Nora," he said. Her name in his mouth had always had a quality that was different from how he said anything else. She had been aware of it for weeks, and had been careful not to examine it directly, because examining it directly would have required acknowledging what it meant. She was examining it now. She turned to face him. She heard him move. The shift of his weight downward, the quiet sound of fabric, and then the specific, deliberate, unmistakable pressure of a knee, meeting the wet stone of the courtyard. He was on one knee, in the rain, in the mud of the courtyard, in front of her. She stood completely still. She reached out the way she always reached into unfamiliar space, slowly, carefully, with the particular attention of someone who has learned that the world is reliable but not predictable. Her hand found his shoulder. She moved it upward along the line of his collarbone, and then to the side of his neck, and then to the angle of his jaw. She felt the cold of the rain on his skin, the roughness of a day's growth of beard, the tension in his jaw, a very specific tension, the kind that belongs to a person who is holding something carefully in place. He did not move away from her hand. She felt him breathe. "You were never broken," he said. His voice was low and fully serious, the voice he used when he said things he had been thinking for a long time, and had finally decided were worth saying. It was the most unmanaged she had ever heard him. "Every person who told you that you were, every person who looked at what you are and decided the part they could not see was the only part that mattered. Every person who used your blindness as a reason to dismiss you before you had the chance to demonstrate anything, every one of them was wrong." He paused. "And I do not think most of them were wrong by accident. I think some of them knew, in some part of themselves, that they were wrong, and they did it anyway, because it was easier to call you insufficient than to acknowledge that what you could see in them was something they were not prepared to be seen." She stood in the rain, with her hand on his face. She heard the words land, and she held them, and she let them be true, which took a different kind of receiving than anything she had been prepared for. She was accustomed to hearing things about herself that required defense or management. She was not accustomed to hearing things about herself that simply required receiving. "You see more than any person I have met," he said. "And I have met a very great many people in 8 years of running a kingdom. You walked 3 days through the borderlands with next to nothing, and came out of them having grown in ways that most people do not grow in a lifetime. You sat in my council chamber, and identified in 40 minutes what 6 years of my most experienced people had not found. You stood in front of the man who humiliated you publicly, and spoke so clearly that a room full of wolves who came in prepared to be neutral found themselves leaning toward your side before you were halfway through." He stopped. "You are the farthest thing from broken I have ever seen." The rain fell around them. She said, "I know that now." It had taken 22 years, and a rejection, and an exile, and 3 cold days in the borderlands, and 6 weeks inside a fortress she had not expected to find. She knew it now, with the specific solidity of a thing known, not because someone told you, but because you have lived it into certainty. It was not the triumphant feeling she might once have imagined it would be. It was quieter than that, small and solid and permanent. like a stone placed in exactly the right position to hold a wall together. Zane stayed on his knee in the rain. She kept her hand at the angle of his jaw. She felt the rain on both of them, and the cold of the courtyard stone, and the warmth of his skin beneath the cold, and she was aware of the complete absence of anything she needed to manage in this moment, which was so unusual in her experience that she noticed it the way you notice silence after long noise. She did not need to do anything. She only needed to be here. After a while he rose. They stood close together in the center of the courtyard, and she kept her hand at the side of his face, and he covered her hand with his own. His palm was warm over her rain-cold fingers. He held it there with the steady, complete certainty of someone who has made a decision and does not intend to revisit it. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing speech could have added to what was already present in the space between them, full and specific and unmistakable, in the way that things are unmistakable when they have been true for a long time and have finally been allowed to be acknowledged. The rain continued. The fortress stood around them, old and quiet and indifferent to the rain, in the way that things built to last are indifferent to weather. She stood in the rain with her hand in his, and her face lifted slightly, the way she had always held her face, toward the world she could not see. And she was entirely present in a way she had not been entirely present in a very long time. The rain went on. The night was entirely itself. She was entirely herself. And that was, she thought, exactly enough. The 30 days that followed Callum Drake's departure from the Iron Crown Fortress were the quietest 30 days Nora had experienced since the Blood Moon ceremony. This was not because nothing happened. Council sessions continued, training with Lena continued, the ordinary business of a large fortified holding went on without interruption, but the quality of the days had changed. The anticipation that had been running underneath everything for 6 weeks was gone, replaced by something different, something that felt, when she held it up and examined it carefully, very much like ordinary life. She had not had ordinary life in a very long time. She spent mornings in the library with Lena, working through increasingly complex training exercises. Lena was not a woman who relaxed her standards because progress had been good, and the work did not become simpler as Nora's skill improved. It became more precise, which was a different kind of difficult. She was learning to distinguish between the fear that comes from threat and the fear that comes from the proximity of something a person wants and is afraid to reach for, which turned out to be considerably more common and considerably more complex than the threat-based kind. She sat in 3 more council sessions as an observer, and in each one, she told Zane afterward what she had read, and each time he listened with the specific quality of attention he gave to information he considered reliable. He never told her she was wrong. Twice he asked follow-up questions that were precise enough to make her understand he had already known some of what she told him, and was looking for the additional layer that her reading could provide. She walked the fortress grounds in the afternoons, in the particular way she walked any space she was working to know completely, letting her feet develop their own memory of the terrain. She had nearly full knowledge of the interior of the main building, and the courtyard, and the 2 auxiliary structures to the east by the end of the 3rd week. The grounds beyond the outer wall she was beginning to map, with Owen's patrol routes as her framework. And there were the evenings in the library. She did not track how many. She noticed only that they had become something she expected, the way she expected meals and training, and the particular sound of the 2nd-floor corridor settling, as the fortress cooled at night. Zane came to the library in the evenings, and he stayed for varying lengths of time, and they talked, or they did not talk, and both possibilities were comfortable, in ways that she did not entirely understand, but had stopped needing to understand. He told her more about his father. He told her about the specific nature of the Alpha King's diplomatic obligations, and why certain of them were more complicated than they appeared, and what the history was that made them complicated. He asked her questions that were more personal than the ones he asked anyone else in the fortress. She understood this from the quality they had, and she answered them honestly, because it had become clear to her very early that dishonesty with Zane Cole was both impossible in the practical sense and undesirable in every other sense. She told him about her childhood, not the parts that required sympathy, because she had never been interested in sympathy, but the parts that were actually interesting, the specific methods she had developed for navigating spaces and situations and people, the things she had learned about the world that were available only to someone who moved through it without sight. He listened to all of it in the way he listened to everything, with complete and undivided attention, not performing attention but actually giving it. She thought about the night in the courtyard often, in the specific way she thought about things that had settled deeply enough to become part of her interior landscape. She did not analyze it. She had been through the analysis in the days immediately following, and had reached all the conclusions she was going to reach, and now she simply knew what it had been, and what it meant, and what she had decided about it, and she held that knowing the way she held everything important, precisely, and without sentiment. On the 31st day, a formal notification arrived from the Interpack Council. The council had received the formal charges filed by 11 senior members of the Silver Crest Pack, led by Felix Marsh. The charges were specific: wrongful exile of a moon-gifted wolf, and abuse of alpha authority in the declaration and execution of that exile. The council had reviewed the preliminary documentation and had convened a formal hearing to be held at the Iron Crown Fortress, which was the Alpha King's seat, and the appropriate venue for a matter involving a wolf found on Iron Crown territory. The hearing was scheduled for 7 days from the date of the notification. Zane told her about the notification in the library that evening. She was quiet for a moment after he finished speaking. "What do you need from me for the hearing?" she said. "Your testimony," he said. "Your presence. Nothing that is not already yours to give." She nodded. "And Callum?" she said. "He will be required to appear," Zane said. "He has been formally notified." She absorbed this. "What does his notification say?" she said. "That the Interpack Council has received charges against him, and that his appearance is required at the formal hearing. The specific charges are described in the notification." She was quiet for a moment. "How will he arrive?" she said. "The same way he arrived last time," Zane said. "With his remaining men, his inner circle has been reduced. Felix Marsh's testimony and the formal charges have shifted the balance of his pack, and not in his favor." She understood what this meant. She had read, in the weeks since the council session, the specific progression of Callum Drake's position. She read it not through any direct contact with him, but through the quality of what she sensed in Felix Marsh during his periodic communications with the Iron Crown in preparation for the hearing, and through what she sensed in Elder Gareth when he spoke about the Silver Crest Pack's current state. Things were unraveling there, had been unraveling since the night of the Blood Moon ceremony, if she was honest about the timeline. What Callum Drake had built in the Silver Crest Pack was built on a specific architecture. The certainty of those beneath him, that challenging him was not worth the cost. That architecture depended entirely on every challenge failing. One challenge, made publicly and persistently and with the formal backing of the Interpack Council, was enough to make the architecture visible as an architecture rather than natural law. And once people could see the architecture, they could also see its weaknesses. "He will come," she said. "He will come," Zane agreed. A pause. "Are you afraid?" he said. She considered this honestly. "No," she said. "I am prepared, which is different. I know what I am going to say. I know what I am going to feel when he is in the room. I know it will be difficult in certain ways, and that the difficulty will not change what needs to be done. That is preparation. Fear would require uncertainty, and I do not have significant uncertainty about any of those things." He was quiet. "You are the most consistently honest person I have met," he said. "Honesty is easier when you can read what people actually think of what you are saying," she said. "It is difficult to lie successfully in the presence of someone who can tell the difference between acceptance and polite management." "Has anyone ever told you something true about yourself that surprised you?" he said. She thought about it. "You did," she said. "In the courtyard." Silence. "I meant what I said," he said. "I know," she said. "That is what surprised me. Not that the words were true, that you meant them without any of the additional layers that usually accompany true things people say to me. Most people who say something true to me are also managing something else, their discomfort, their concern, their desire for a particular response. You were not managing anything." A long quiet. "I am not often without management," he said. "No," she agreed. "That is why it was notable." The fire in the grate had burned down to a warm and steady red. Outside the library window, the winter had deepened over the past week, and the wind moved through the trees to the north of the fortress, with the specific voice that cold wind has in winter branches. "Tell me what you read from me right now," he said. She did not need to adjust her angle. or expand her awareness, or apply any of the deliberate techniques Lena had taught her. She read Zane Cole the way she breathed, continuously, without effort, with the complete naturalness of a person doing something their whole being had been organized around doing. "A great deal of peace," she said, "more than I have read from you before tonight. And underneath it, the specific quality of someone who has decided something and is not second-guessing the decision. And underneath that, something I have read from you since approximately the 3rd week I was here, that has been growing steadily, and has arrived, tonight, at something complete." She paused. "What is it?" he said, though she suspected he knew. "The same thing I have been carrying for approximately the same amount of time," she said, "and have been sitting with honestly for the past month." A silence that was its own kind of answer. "Nora," he said. "I know," she said. "I know." He did not cross the room. She did not move toward him. They sat in the library in the warm remainder of the fire, and the winter wind outside, and the old stone quiet of the fortress, and everything that needed to be said had been said, and the things that had not yet been said were not necessary tonight. He left at midnight. She sat alone for a while after he was gone. In the specific way she had been sitting alone in this library for weeks, with the satisfaction of a room that had held something important, and was still holding the quality of it. She thought about the hearing in 7 days. She thought about Callum Drake arriving in this building again, and about what she was going to say, and about the record she was going to help create, and about what it would mean not just for her, but for the next moonblind wolf, wherever and whenever that wolf arrived in a world that did not understand what she was. She thought about all of it, clearly and without flinching, and then she let herself be finished thinking about it for tonight. She went to her room. She slept well. In the morning she woke and went to the library, and found Lena already there, with the text she would need for the hearing's formal documentation, and she sat across from her, and they began the final preparation, working through it, with the same precision they brought to everything, leaving nothing approximate or uncertain that could be made clear. 7 days, the Interpack Council convened on a gray morning in the first true cold of winter. 43 pack representatives had made the journey to the Iron Crown Fortress from territories across the region, some of them traveling 3 or 4 days to be present. They filled the large council chamber along both sides of the table, and their assistants and advisors occupied the rows of chairs behind them, and the room held more people than it had held in years. Elder Gareth noted this with his characteristic dryness when he opened the proceedings, and the room's quiet response confirmed that everyone present understood what it meant for this many packs to send representation to a single hearing. What happened here today would be in the record for a very long time. The charges had been formally filed and formally accepted. They were specific, and they were serious. Wrongful exile of a moon-gifted wolf under the protections of the ancient compact between the Moon Goddess and the founding packs, and abuse of alpha authority in the declaration and execution of said exile. The filing party consisted of 11 senior members of the Silvercrest Pack, led by Felix Marsh, who had arrived at the Iron Crown 2 days earlier with his own witnesses. Callum Drake sat at the far end of the table, with his legal advocate and 2 remaining senior men. He had arrived the previous afternoon with considerably less ceremony than his first visit. She had read him when he came through the building's main entrance, from a distance, which she now had the trained capacity to do when a presence was strong enough, and she was paying sufficient attention. He had not changed in the way she might have expected. He was still controlled, still calculating, still working, but the calculation had a different quality now. It was not the calculation of someone managing a situation they expect to turn in their favor. It was the calculation of someone who understands that the odds are against them and is looking for the one specific angle that might still represent an exit. She was not afraid of that calculation. She had been prepared for it. Nora sat 3 seats from the head of the table, beside Lena Hart, who had the texts and the documentation arranged with her customary precision in front of her. Zane sat at the head of the table in his formal capacity. He had told her the night before, in the library during a conversation that had lasted until very late, that he would not speak on her behalf unless the formal proceedings required it. He had said it because he wanted her to know that the words were hers to speak, and she had said good, because they were, and they had both understood each other completely. She read the room as Gareth began the opening formalities. 43 representatives, most of them genuine in their attention, some of them performing it. This was ordinary for any large gathering, and she did not hold it against the performers. Several of them had come with specific territorial interests that were adjacent to but not identical with the specific subject of the hearing, and they were here, partly to witness, and partly to assess what precedent might be established, and what it might mean for their own situations. This was pragmatic and not dishonest. The genuine ones, the majority, were here because an 11-member filing against an alpha was extremely rare, and the charges were of a type that had not been formally prosecuted in recorded memory, and they understood that what was decided today would shape how the compact's protections were interpreted going forward. Gareth read the charges. He read the preliminary documentation that had been submitted with the filing. Then Lena read the relevant sections of the ancient compact, which she had now read in this context 3 times, and which she delivered with an unhurried clarity that left no ambiguity about what the compact's protections meant, or how directly they applied to the specific situation at hand. The advocate for the filing party was a woman named Clara Holt, a small, precise person who had practiced interpack law for 20 years, and who read everything she needed from the documents in front of her without editorializing. She established the legal framework for the charges, and what the relevant precedents were, and how the ancient compact's protections interacted with modern pack law in cases of conflict. She was thorough and clear. Then Callum's advocate presented the defense. He was skilled. He cited the alpha's rights under modern pack law accurately. He challenged the direct applicability of the ancient compact to contemporary circumstances. He argued that the moonblind designation, while historically significant, had not been formally recognized in any modern interpack framework, and therefore could not be invoked retroactively against a decision made under the modern framework. He argued this last point carefully, and at some length, and she read, as he made it, that it was the one argument he genuinely believed might carry weight. Elder Gareth asked 2 specific questions about this point, to which the advocate gave specific answers, and then Gareth noted the responses without comment, and moved on. Then the witnesses for the filing party were invited to speak. Felix Marsh went first. She had read his emotional state when he arrived 2 days ago, and had found it different from what she had read from him in any of their previous encounters. The guilt and the managed shame, and the specific tension of someone who has been carrying something that sits wrongly in them, were still there. But underneath all of those things, she had found something new. A resolution. He had decided. He was not managing his decision anymore. He had arrived at the Iron Crown Fortress knowing exactly what he was going to say, and had not, from that point forward, been uncertain about any of it. He spoke for 8 minutes. He was direct and specific, and he referenced documents he had brought with him that corroborated the specific details of the exile morning, the preparation, the conditions, the exact words that had been spoken. He said that he had known on the morning of the exile that it was wrong, and that he had followed orders because following orders was what a beta did, and because he had told himself that the specific wrongness of this particular order was not large enough to justify the cost of refusing it. He said he had been wrong about that. He said he was making the correction now. He sat down. 3 more Silver Crest Pack members spoke in turn. Clara, who had been present at the ceremony as a witness. Neil, who had been one of the young warriors on the exile morning detail. And Elder Bram, who had traveled to the Iron Crown specifically for this day, and who was the oldest person in the room, and who spoke with the specific directness of a man who had nothing left to protect. Elder Bram said, "I had the authority to intervene. I had the seniority. I had the grounds. I made a calculation about the cost of using that authority, and I decided the cost was too high. I have been revising that calculation every day for the past 2 months, and I have arrived at the same conclusion each time. I was wrong. I am here because the record should be correct." Gareth said, "Nora Voss, you are invited to address the council." She stood. She read the room as she rose. 43 representatives, all present, all attending. The specific quality of a large group giving its collective attention to a single voice, which was a particular kind of stillness that she had come to recognize, and which she found, more now than ever before, that she could stand inside without difficulty. She spoke clearly, and at a pace that gave the room time to follow. She described the ceremony, and the bond, and the rejection. She described the exile, and the border stones, and the 3 days in the borderlands. She described what Owen Ward's patrol had found at the northern stream, and what it had meant to her, practically, to be found at that particular moment. She described arriving at the Iron Crown and what she had discovered about herself in the weeks that followed, not in terms of what others had done for her, but in terms of what the gift she carried had become when it was finally allowed to operate in an environment that did not require it to be hidden. Then she said, "I want to say one more thing." Gareth said, "Go ahead." "The morning after the ceremony," she said, "I thought about the night for a long time. I thought about what I had heard and what I had felt, and I thought about what I had read from Callum Drake in those moments, as clearly as I was able to read anything at that time, before my training, before I knew the name of what I could do." She paused. "What I read from him was not the feeling of someone making a difficult but necessary decision for the good of his pack. It was the feeling of someone who was afraid, not afraid of me, and not afraid of my limitations, afraid of how the situation would make him appear, afraid of the story that other people would tell about him if he stood in that ceremony field and claimed a blind Omega as his fated mate." Another pause. "I am saying this not because I want this council to feel something on my behalf. I am saying it because the record should accurately reflect the grounds on which the rejection and the exile were declared. And the grounds were pride and fear, not genuine pack welfare. An alpha who makes a decision affecting a pack member's entire life, based on how the decision will affect his personal image, has abused the authority he was given. That is what happened. I want it written down." She sat down. The room was quiet. Then something happened that she had not anticipated. A voice from the far side of the table, from the direction of the filing party, from Callum Drake's side of the room, one of the 43 representatives, a woman whose voice she did not recognize, said very quietly, to the person sitting beside her, "She is right." She did not say it loudly. She did not say it for the room. She said it in the private murmur of a person who has heard something that has resolved something for them. But the room was quiet enough that several people heard it, and the ripple of that small statement, that quiet three-word confirmation from someone who had come in with no particular stake in the outcome, moved across the room in a way that no formal testimony could have produced. Callum's advocate made a final statement. It was shorter than his opening, and she read, from the specific quality of his delivery, that he was a professional who had assessed the room and knew what the assessment meant. He was making the record of his effort rather than the record of his expectation. Callum himself was permitted a closing statement. He used it. His voice was controlled, and his argument was the same argument he had made throughout, in compressed form. She read him while he spoke, and found, for the first time since she had known him in any capacity, something that was not calculation. It was a simple and complete recognition that the outcome had been determined. He did not look at her when he finished speaking. The council deliberated. Representatives moved into side rooms, and the main chamber held the murmur of lower conversations, and the sound of the fortress around them, going about its day outside the chamber's walls. Nora sat with her hands in her lap, and she was entirely still. Zane sat at the head of the table and did not speak. She felt his presence with the steady familiarity she had developed over weeks, and she felt from him what she had felt from him since the morning, a focused, patient attention to what was happening, and underneath it, the quality she had read from him in the library the night before, still there, still settled, still certain. After 50 minutes, the council returned. Gareth read the findings. The council found unanimously that the exile of Nora Voss had been declared without legitimate grounds, as defined under the ancient compact. The stated grounds were insufficient under the compact's protections for moon-gifted wolves. The manner and conditions of the exile constituted a violation of those protections. The council found further, with a majority of 41 of 43 representatives, that the abuse of alpha authority as charged had been established by the testimony and documentation presented. The consequences were read. Formal censure of Callum Drake, entered into the Interpack registry. Removal of his alpha title, effective immediately and permanently. The Silver Crest Pack placed under council stewardship for a period of 1 year, during which the pack would be guided by an appointed council steward in the establishment of a new leadership structure. Gareth finished reading and set the document flat on the table. Callum stood. He did not speak. He had nothing to say that would have changed anything, and she had understood since reading him at the beginning of the hearing that he understood this. He rose with the controlled precision of someone who has decided that the only remaining thing he can manage is how he leaves a room. He walked to the door, and his men followed him, and they went out in silence. And the sound of them in the corridor faded, and the sound of the outer courtyard faded, and then there was nothing from that direction at all. The chamber held its quiet, and then the marks on her wrists began to move. She felt it before anyone else was aware of it. The warmth that had been building since Gareth began reading the findings, spreading now up her forearms, with a clarity and a completeness she had not felt before. Not just up to her elbows, up past her elbows, past her forearms, reaching toward her shoulders, and the pattern that was spreading was not the partial pattern she had carried since the borderlands, but the complete design, the full seal of a moon-blind wolf who has come fully into her inheritance. She heard the room react. 43 representatives and their assistants, and the council members, and Owen at the door, and Gareth at the head of the table. One collective sound, the sound of a large group of people seeing the same thing at the same moment, and understanding what they are seeing. Lena's hand found her forearm lightly, just above the wrist. "Let it come," Lena said. She let it. The warmth settled. The marks found their full extent and became still. The warmth remained, but steadied, the way a fire steadies when it has found its proper size. She heard Zane stand. She tracked his footsteps as he came around the table and crossed the chamber toward her. The unhurried pace, the full weight of someone who knows exactly where he is going and has already decided everything about it. She turned toward him before he reached her. He stopped in front of her. She read him with everything she had, every layer of the moonblind sight at full capacity, and what she found was clear and complete, and entirely consistent with everything she had been reading for weeks. The control was there, as it always was, as it would probably always be because it was structural to him by now, built in over years. The grief was there, compressed and transformed. The loneliness was there, present but different, thinner, as if something had been relieved of it over the past months, without a formal announcement of the relief. And the thing that had been growing since the 3rd week of her time in this fortress, the thing that had become steady and then complete, and then settled in the past 30 days, that was there too, at full intensity, and it was specific, and it was unambiguous, and it was entirely and without question directed at her. He extended his hand. She read it, steady, certain, the gesture of a man who has decided something and is not offering it for deliberation. Not a question, a statement. She extended her hand and took his, not because she needed him to lead her, not because the room was watching and the occasion required it, not because the marks on her arms meant she had become something that required a particular kind of escort. She had been finding her way through spaces she could not see since the day she learned to walk. She had navigated 3 days in the borderlands alone. She had stood in this room and spoken clearly into 43 faces she could not see, and had not needed anyone to stand with her to do it. She took his hand because she chose to. Choosing something freely, after a life in which so many things had been decided for her, and around her, and without her, was its own kind of arrival. She recognized it as she made it, recognized the specific quality of this choice, as something she had been walking toward for a long time, without knowing that was what she was doing. They walked out of the council chamber together. She felt the room's attention as they passed through it. 43 representatives, the council members, Lena Hart, Elder Gareth, Owen at the door. She felt the specific quality of attention that fills a room when the people in it understand they are witnessing something that will be in the record for a very long time, not because it is dramatic but because it is true. They crossed into the corridor. The sounds of the chamber fell behind them. Morning light came through the high windows of the hallway and fell across the stone floor in long, clean bars, and she felt the warmth of it on the back of her hand and on the marks on her forearms, which were still gently warm, and would be, she understood, for the rest of her life. She did not know everything that came next. There was a great deal to be done. The Silver Crest pack needed structure. The interpack implications of the Moonblind site's return needed to be worked through. Lena had 3 texts she had not yet finished reading, and had mentioned twice that they contained material she considered significant. The world did not slow because a chapter of it had resolved. But she walked with her hand in Zane's, and the fortress around her was a place she knew in the complete and specific way she knew all the places that had become hers, and it was hers, not because anyone had given it to her or declared it so, but because she had chosen it, and it had chosen her. and those were the only terms on which she had ever been interested in belonging anywhere. She had been exiled in the dark. She had walked out of it on her own feet, as she had walked out of every darkness that had ever been placed in her path. She had spoken what was true, in rooms full of people who needed to hear it, and she had spoken it clearly, and without performance, and it had mattered, and the record of it would remain. The marks on her wrists were warm. She walked through the morning light with her chin where it had always been, and her steps where she put them, and she did not look back toward any of the rooms she had left behind. She had never needed to see where she was going. She had always known how to find her way.